Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding the Real Costs and Benefits of Budgeting and Planning Solutions. My name's John Brooks. I'm a director in the London office of insightsoftware.com. Formerly I was a JDMs developer and consultant for 10 years. I'm pleased today to be joined by Philip Howard from Bloor. Philip, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, John. So I'm the research director at Bloor Research. I've been an analyst industry analyst for over 20 years, and I head up the information management group at Bloor Research.
Thank you. And the reason we're having this webinar today is to talk about the report that was published a little earlier this year. Could you give us some more information about the report, please?
Yes, what we did was we surveyed a number of users of ERP solutions and how they were addressing the issue of planning applications. And some of those were from Insight Software, some of them were using Hyperion or Cognos or Excel. A few people were using some other things, but those were the areas we concentrated on. And as I say, we surveyed those users as to how they were using the product, what it was costing them, so on and so forth.
Wonderful. And we will be sending out a link to the report later to download. Now, in the report, you mentioned TCO throughout. Can you tell us what this means exactly and why companies should take note of it in their planning application evaluation process?
Yeah. TCO is the key thing here. I mean, it's total cost of ownership. And the key thing is it is the total cost. And that includes everything. So if you have to have, if you implement part of your business intelligence system to support planning on a mainframe, on a data warehouse, then that includes the electricity costs of maintaining that and the cooling and so on and so forth. So really everything that's involved, planning it, implementing it, how much it costs to run on an ongoing basis. So total cost of ownership really is everything. And I think that the last point on this slide highlights the fact that actually you're not going to know early on how much the whole thing is costing. It is relatively late. Once the thing is fully deployed and you can see how it's running day to day.
So, Philip, what would you say were the main goals the organisations you surveyed wanted from a planning solution?
Well, there are really three benefits that people are looking for. First of all, they're looking for functionality which will serve their business, enable them to make financial decisions based on the information that they're getting. Secondly, they want things which are easy to use, as much self-service as possible. People don't want to rely on IT. And the third thing, of course, is they want their solution to be cost as little as possible.
And I suppose that something else that may not always make people's wish lists is the importance of time to value. You found that some systems take considerably longer to implement than others.
Yes, indeed. So here on this slide, these are some results from the survey as to how long it actually took to implement the system in the first place, because you can't get any value from it until the thing is up and running. And of course, the interesting thing is just how much longer it takes to use systems from IBM or Oracle as opposed to Insight in your case, or Excel for that matter. There's a significant gap between those, and particularly a lot of companies who going to move, who've outgrown Excel, if you like. Where do they go? Are they really going to invest the best part of a year in just implementing some new system? That's a long time to be not actually getting any value out of your system.
So let's have a look at the total cost of ownership of the various options you looked at.
Okay, so this is a chart from the report detailing the different costs according to these four platforms. I should say, just as a comment here, that we, as far as the report was concerned, we took Insight as an exemplar. This wasn't specifically about Insight. It was about Insight as an example of a solution of the type that it fits into.
Mm-hmm. And what we can see there is actually in the chart, there's a considerable amount of cost in the first year, both the initial consulting cost to design the system, and then also the blue part of the chart, which is the first year cost to actually do the implementation. They're quite high in some of those cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out, I mean, you might, that the initial consulting costs there, that is, the planning of the system. That's not the actual implementation of the system. That would go in the first year costs. Otherwise, you might, with Hyperion, for example, you might expect to have, quite high consulting costs, but that's because a lot of that is actually hidden in the first year costs.
Right, thank you. One thing that did surprise me about that slide was Excel. Why is Excel so expensive?
Good question. Well, mostly because Excel is you have to do it every time you go through a budgeting cycle, for example. You have to go through the whole process again. It's not automated. There are tools actually in the market which allow you to capture Excel processes where you combine spreadsheets and perhaps with other details and whatever. But you'd have to go out and license that completely separately. As a standard thing, you have to reinvent the process every time you do it. It's manual, it's therefore prone to errors, and there are a lot of potential administrative costs. So that's why.
It is something we see a lot of customers out there with various ERP systems with Excel-based planning, where they've just got hundreds or even thousands of Excels each year being produced. It is a tremendous ongoing cost.
Yeah. So just to give you an example here. So what we've got is you start by creating. You send out your spreadsheet or spreadsheets to the various budget owners. They go and spend a variable amount of time creating those spreadsheets. Then tend to be emailed back and forward because different people within each group in the company need to contribute. They don't come back in time. Often, you have to go chase half of the people because they haven't, everybody hates doing budgeting. So, the process is always delayed. Then some of the people are clearly there are errors in them and you need to check for errors. People have put things in the wrong column or in the wrong box or whatever. And then you have to manually consolidate it because you don't have a repeatable process. And then finally you upload it to the ERP system. And then every time you have a budgeting cycle, you have to do it all over again and start from scratch, in effect. It's very time-consuming and therefore costly.
And what about business intelligence and data warehouses, such as Cognos and Hyperion? Are they the right choice for planning?
Well, I think it depends to a significant extent on the size and scale of your organisation and your requirements and your budgets. It's a significant additional cost if you're going to have to take data out of the ERP system, put it into a data warehouse, doing supporting those sorts of processes. Of course, many companies, particularly larger companies, will be doing that anyway, but not for planning purposes, but for other traditional reporting and analytics and so forth. So from that point of view, it may not be a significant extra cost, but if it purely looking at it as a planning system, it will extend the implementation time. You do have issues extracting the data. Performance is not always as good as you expect it to do. The big problem actually really is the last point about if you are extracting the data from your ERP system, putting it into a data warehouse, it's likely to be out of sync with the ERP system unless you're using change data capture with real-time trickle feeds and that sort of thing, which means even more technology. So typically, you're looking at old data, and you lose a lot of the benefits.
So there does appear to be that gap then between people who've maybe outgrown an Excel-based system but don't have the time, resources, or money to put in one of those very expensive, time-consuming systems.
Well, yeah, I mean that's certainly true. As I say, very large organisations will tend to have a data warehouse already, but your average small to medium-sized business, may well not require that.
So even if you have invested in business intelligence or a data warehouse, you're still having to break the link to your ERP system.
Yes, typically. As I say, you can have real things like real-time replication and so forth, but that's a further added complexity and added expense. Ideally, you don't want to break the link. You'd like to, why wouldn't, you've got the information in the ERP system, why wouldn't you just want to get at it directly, if you like? And apart from anything else, it's much simpler to manage a single system which does all of this planning, the BI part, all of the investigation, all from a single system rather than have multiple systems. So you don't have any integration issues then, it's easier to maintain, it's just simpler.
And of course there are bigger issues associated with breaking the link, both with spreadsheets and data warehouses.
Yes, there are, and I'll treat those separately. So, first of all, if we think about spreadsheets, there are lots of problems with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets should be treated as a traditional application, if you like. So, you build a spreadsheet planning application, if you like, and it should go through formal testing procedures and all the other things that an IT application would go through. Problem is people don't do it that way, so that the applications are not properly tested or validated. There are huge numbers of potential errors. There's a report which was published some time ago. Any spreadsheet with more than 250 lines has a 98% plus chance of having an error in it. I've already talked about repeatable processes. Or the lack thereof. There are issues about governance. A major problem that often occurs is that you have spreadsheets which are linked together. Those links break, and how do you discover that? Then you've got fraud issues because it's easy to use. Not only, I'm not just talking about external fraud if the data, gets to people that it shouldn't do, but internally you can have white on white cells, you can hide information behind graphics, you can do all sorts of interesting things with spreadsheets to fraud, and the other thing is that they're not secure. If you can encrypt spreadsheets, if you're using Excel, except that if your Excel crashes and you have to go to a backup file, that's not encrypted. So anybody can effectively break into your spreadsheets. So there are all sorts of problems with spreadsheets. And if we move on to sort of data warehouse, business intelligence type environment, you are now starting to rely on data integration tools or ETL or ELT tools. And as I mentioned before, possibly real-time replication, change data capture, so on and so forth. So that's whatever it is, that's a complex environment. It's more expensive. It costs more to maintain. You have to schedule updates. As mentioned, it's only as good as the last update. So unless you have real-time capabilities, and that means extra software and probably higher levels of hardware to get the performance you need. So extracting data is equally a problem in this environment.
I have heard numerous times stories about updates not going through overnight, and that meaning the data warehouse system is just unavailable for the whole of the next day until it gets to the next overnight rebuild. And, maybe that was because master data hadn't been maintained, or some accounts had been added in the ERP system that hadn't been added in the data warehouse, so the update failed and the system unavailable. So there's it is a problem I've heard many times from customers.
Yeah, you don't surprise me.
Now, how much should companies take into account their ERP upgrade plans when looking at choosing a planning system?
Well, you've got to bear in mind that you want to have your planning system and your ERP system, the one supports the other. So if the ERP system is upgraded, you need to make sure that that will still run with your existing planning software. Because otherwise, if upgrading your ERP system means you have to change your planning system, then there's a whole extra cost which you may not have thought about when you were just talking about upgrading your ERP system.
And certainly, I've heard very recently from a customer who is being forced to upgrade their planning system because of an ERP upgrade, and it's not just the efforts and the cost of doing that. The people who need to be involved in that upgrade are already very, very busy on the ERP project, and they had no spare resource internally to do a planning upgrade at the same time.
Yeah, and of course there's the opposite way around too, that you want your planning system, if you upgrade your planning system, that needs to be compatible with your existing ERP system. So it works both ways.
Now, some people may be tempted to go with a stack of products from a single vendor, but how integrated are these stacks? Is there a one-stop shop out there?
Well, the honest truth is that most of these products are, I don't want to necessarily single out, either Oracle or IBM here, but typically these are a series of different tools which have been acquired from various different places. Hyperion was a separate company that was acquired by Oracle. Cognos was a separate company that was acquired by IBM. And they've been integrated so that they work together, but they haven't been redesigned or rebuilt so that they have a common platform, so that they share a sort of deep level of integration, if you like. In practice, you wouldn't be far wrong to say they've been cobbled together as a bunch of separate tools. So, although they're marketed as a single stack, you have to be a bit, the integration is not as deep as you would like. There are effectively separate tools which will work together, rather than being a single integrated.
I have heard someone comment in the past that the only thing that was integrated about the stack was the invoice they received.
Yeah.
So, in summary, what do you say?
Well, I think first of all, the obvious, if you're a JD Edwards user or PeopleSoft user or an Oracle user, or even if for that matter, if you turn around if you're an SAP user, whatever ERP system you're using, don't just, it's easy to go and say, okay, well, I'll just stick with the same supplier. That's the default option. It's the lowest common denominator. I would. That's a very simple solution, but I'm not sure it's the best one. And I think people shouldn't just take the default option because it's simple. I personally much prefer the idea of having a single product that does all your planning requirements for you, and associated activities, drilling into the data, exploring it, and so on and so forth, rather than having to have multiple products. One product to do what you need is evidently simpler than having multiple products. There is a question about spreadsheets. Spreadsheets for smaller companies certainly perfectly adequate. I would recommend going out and getting something which will enable you to capture those repeatable processes. But I would say if you're working with Sage or one of that sort of level of ERP, then perhaps using Excel makes sense. I think if you're big enough to afford JD Edwards or PeopleSoft or SAP or Oracle, you're probably out of the spreadsheet league, and therefore you need to be looking at something a bit more sophisticated. And then finally, do have a look at the market. Look at our resources. Look at this the survey we published, and look closely at the market before you make decisions.
And as we said earlier, the Bloor survey report is available to download, and we'll be sending a link out. This is a new piece of research that was done in May 2014, so that is available right now. Now, hopefully this has been a useful webinar if you're planning to look at different planning options around your ERP system. If you do have any questions, both myself and Philip would love to hear from you. So you've got our direct email addresses on the screen. And all that's required for me to do now is say thank you, Philip, for coming along today and joining me on this webinar.
My pleasure, John.